ever get the feeling like, I don't know, like there's this whole world of languages out there we rarely think about?
Hmm.
We're diving into one today that's probably a lot bigger than you might expect. We're talking about Urdu. And trust me, this isn't going to be just like grammar rules and stuff, although we'll touch on those too.
Yeah, it's true. Urdu it flies under the radar a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's actually, here's a fact that might surprise you. It's the 10th most spoken language in the world.
Wow.
Globally. Yeah. 230 million speakers. That actually puts it ahead of both German and French.
Really? Wow, that's really eye-opening. Okay, so we're talking about a language with some serious global reach. But before we go any further, let's back up a little bit. What exactly is Urdu? Where did it come from?
Well, I mean, the word Urdu itself is actually a clue. It comes from the Turkish word for army, which this is going to take us back to its origins, which are really interesting. You got to imagine, like, these bustling military camps, centuries ago, where you had all these soldiers and traders and people from all these different backgrounds coming together, and they need a common language to communicate with each other. So out of that need, Urdu kind of emerged. It drew mainly from what's called the Indo-Aryan language family.
Yeah.
So the family of languages that spread all the way from ancient India to Europe.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Urdu wasn't just like born in some scholar's study somewhere, but it was really forged out of necessity in these really vibrant, diverse environments.
Exactly.
That's a really cool origin story. So, but if it has these Turkish influences, how did it become so deeply connected to South Asia, particularly like India and Pakistan?
Well, that's the journey that we're going to unpack. So the standardized Urdu that we know today, that emerged around the 18th century, but its roots go back much further, like to medieval times. And to understand this connection, we need to go to a different part of India, the Deccan region in southern India.
Okay.
It was actually there that Urdu flourished as, like, this language of poetry. And it drew influences from other languages of the region, like Marathi and Telugu.
I have to admit, I never realized that southern India played such a key role in the development of Urdu. That adds a whole other layer to this.
Right.
But speaking of connections, I'm really curious about Urdu's relationship with Hindi. They seem to be, they're mentioned together a lot. Are they really two sides of the same coin?
Linguistically, I think that's a really good way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah, because they both, they come from this common ancestor, this language called Hindustani.
Okay.
And I think a good way to think about it is like British English and American English.
Right.
Similar structure, but they have their own unique quirks and words for things.
Sure.
So Hindi and Urdu, they share a lot of their grammar, a lot of their vocabulary, but yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So where does the divide come in then? Is it simply a matter of using different writing systems?
I mean, the scripts definitely play a role. So Urdu uses the elegant Nastaliq script, which comes from Persian calligraphy.
Okay.
Whereas Hindi uses the Devanagari script. And this visual distinction, along with some political developments, became more and more significant over time.
Political developments. Okay, now you're speaking my language. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. So did this happen primarily like after India and Pakistan became independent?
Yeah, it's a complex story. I mean, British colonialism definitely played a part in this in shaping kind of the landscape. But this divide really deepened after independence, where Urdu became very closely associated with Muslim identity in Pakistan.
Okay.
And Hindi with Hindu identity in India.
So even though they have this shared history, culturally, politically, forces kind of drove a wedge between these two languages. That's really interesting. It makes you think about like language and identity and politics and how they're all intertwined.
Absolutely. And understanding this historical context is really key, not just for like the past, but to understand contemporary issues and some of the debates that we see happening even today.
Yeah, it reminds us that language is about so much more than just words. It's deeply connected to history and culture and even current events.
Exactly. It's like a lens to help us understand the world better.
It really is. So speaking of the wider world, maybe we can shift gears just a little bit and talk about the state of Urdu today. I mean, is it mainly confined to South Asia or has it spread beyond those borders?
Well, we were talking about Urdu's global reach, and we can't forget about that number, 230 million speakers worldwide. It really makes you wonder, like, where are all these people? Yeah, you're right to think beyond South Asia. I mean, migration has played such a huge role in spreading this language.
Right.
So you find these vibrant Urdu-speaking communities, and the Gulf states, in Europe, North America, really all over the world.
It's really interesting how languages travel like that. I mean, I imagine being surrounded by Urdu, but in these totally different cultural contexts, it's got to lead to some interesting adaptations and stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. And a really cool example of that is this emergence of what they call Urdish.
Urdudish.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this blend of Urdu and English, and it's actually really creative the way that they do it.
Okay.
Like you'll hear it in communities where people like seamlessly weave English words and phrases into their Urdu conversations.
Yeah.
So you might have someone say something like "Maina market gaya tha" for groceries,
Okay.
which basically means like I went to the market today for groceries.
Okay.
But it's so cool how it like reflects the everyday experiences of the speakers, you know?
Yeah. Urdish. I love that. That's like I don't know, it's like the linguistic equivalent of like fusion cuisine, you know.
It's fact.
Taking elements from different cultures and kind of blending them together. I love it. So, you know, we're talking about Urdu evolving in these really diverse settings. Are there also efforts to kind of preserve it in its, you know, more traditional form?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is a resounding yes. So, you know, while some people worry that Urdu might fade away, especially, you know, in our increasingly globalized world,
Right.
there's a really passionate movement dedicated to keeping it alive. And we're seeing like language schools, cultural organizations, even online platforms, they all play a really crucial role in teaching and promoting the language.
That's really good to hear. I mean, are there any like, you know, particularly innovative approaches being used to make sure that it's preserved?
Yeah, so there's one trend that I think is super interesting, and that's the use of the Devanagari script to actually write Urdu,
Oh, wow.
particularly in India. And they see it as a way to kind of like bridge the gap with Hindi speakers,
Okay.
make it more accessible to a wider audience.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, in terms of, you know, trying to reach more people, but wouldn't that, like using a different script, wouldn't that risk kind of, I don't know, blurring the lines between Urdu and Hindi even more?
Yeah, and that's a valid concern. I mean, there's definitely a debate around this whole approach. Some people see it as this like really practical solution, you know, to promote literacy and cross-cultural understanding. But then others worry that it might dilute Urdu's distinct identity.
Yeah, I can see that.
So it speaks to this larger tension that exists, I think, between preserving tradition and adapting to a changing world,
Right, right.
which is something that a lot of languages are dealing with today.
For sure, for sure. I mean, it just reminds you that language is constantly changing, you know? It's shaped by its speakers and just like the world around it.
Exactly. And like anything that evolves, it faces challenges and opportunities. I think the future of Urdu, just like any language, it's going to be determined by the choices of its speakers, by the policies of governments, and just like the always changing dynamics of global culture.
It's just amazing to think that, you know, this language with its roots in these ancient military camps is now navigating like, you know, the complexities of the digital age, you know, social media and instant communication and all that.
I know, it's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
And thinking about that digital realm, it kind of leads to another question. How has this new landscape, you know, like with the internet and everything, how has that impacted the way that Urdu is used and perceived, both within South Asia, but also among the diaspora?
That's a really great question. It's like the story of Urdu is still being written. You know, it's evolving with every generation and every new technology.
Absolutely. And that evolution is something that we can all like engage with, you know, whether it's appreciating the beauty of Urdu poetry or exploring its rich literary tradition or even just learning a few basic phrases. Every interaction kind of adds to the ongoing story of this language.
Yeah. It reminds us that language isn't static, you know, it's this living, breathing thing. It's shaped by, like you said, countless interactions and experiences of its speakers. And with Urdu, it's just amazing that journey, you know, from those bustling military camps to the global stage.
It's pretty remarkable. It's easy to get focused on the future, you know, where it's going, but
Yeah.
it's like we almost forget, you know, to look back and just think about like how much history is there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we've only just like, you know, scratched the surface here of Urdu and its cultural significance.
Exactly. We've gone from those early military camps, like way back when, you know, to where it first emerged, to the Deccan region where it became this language of poetry. We even touched on its relationship with Hindi, what brings them together and what, you know, what divides them. And then, of course, there's, you know, its global reach. Urdu is still changing today, which is pretty amazing.
It really is. This whole journey has really I don't know, it's given me a whole new perspective on just how powerful language is.
I'm so glad. Because that's what it's all about. I mean, understanding a language like Urdu, it's so much more than vocabulary and grammar. It's about connecting with, like, this huge tapestry of human experience. There's history, there's culture, there's art. It's all there.
Yeah, it's true. Like every language has all these stories, struggles, the triumphs, the dreams. It's all baked right in there.
It really is.
Yeah.
So, as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Urdu here, I hope it leaves you wanting more. There's so much to explore.
Absolutely. And for those who do want to learn more, I think here's something to think about. We talked about the digital age and how it's changed so much. How do you think all that, the internet, social media, how has that changed how people use Urdu, both in South Asia but also around the world? It's kind of like, what's the next chapter?
What a great question to end on. Language is always changing. It's always adapting. And Urdu, with all its intricacies, with its history, it's going to keep evolving. This story is far from over.